PO23, which is finding a percent of a whole number. We kind of got started with this yesterday and talking about this first fraction method. And so we did the shots and the test example together. You did 60% of 40. Let's warm up with 70% of 90. Use the fraction method that we talked about yesterday to calculate that. 70% of 90. Just to refresh your memory, that first step is to convert our percentage to a fraction, right? That's why it's the fraction method, okay? And then use that to set up a proportion. Question or answer?
Oh, I was going to say it again.
Okay, say that for now. Let's go. Do the thing. 70% of 90. Practice with the fraction method just to refresh our memories a little bit.
We're doing this on our own, right?
Yes, on your own. Yep. You've got notes to look at. You've got two examples from up in the top. You've got the one that you did yesterday as well. Okay? Good. That's a good start there, yeah. You already did it. Oh, good. Fantastic. Yeah. It wasn't homework to finish this page. Yes. Yesterday we stopped that first one, but some of you may have gone on. Just the take initiative. Fantastic. So 70% as a fraction, 70 over 100, right? And the proportion that we're setting up here is we're saying, okay, 70 over 100 is equal to how many out of 90, right? How many out of 90? And then 90 comes from that other number in the original question. So there's no good scale factor here to get from 100 to 90. So what did you do, Hannah?
I just multiply. I did
Cross products, yes. Multiply 70 by 90, divide by 100, and what did you come up with? 63 is the correct answer. So if you got 63, job well done. What's another thing you could have done if you didn't use cross products? Callie.
Simplify?
Yeah, what would you simplify 70 over 100 to be?
9, 10.
Not 9
Wait,
tenths.
what?
7 tenths.
Oh,
right?
I thought you said 90.
No, sorry, maybe I did. 70 over 100 would simplify to be 7 tenths. And then set that equal to something over 90. Now we have this scale factor of multiplying by 9 to get from 10 to 90. Multiply by 9 to get from 7 times 9 gives us 63. 63, same answer here. All right? Don't have band after all?
It was at 8:30.
It was or it is?
It is at 8:30.
Is at 8:30? Okay. Oh, okay. All right, questions on that? Very good. So the second method we're going to talk about today is the percentage method, okay? And like I said, you don't need to know all three of these. You really only need to know one of them to have success, but it's nice to have options in case, your brain clicks with one better than the other. So what's our 20% made 30%? Okay, so going back to that shots example, we are looking to find 30% of 20. Right? She took 20 shots, made 30%. We are looking to find 30% of 20. In the percentages method, we're not going to convert anything, but we're going to think about this in terms of 10%. And here's where you can start to do these things mentally. The fraction method is a little bit difficult to do mentally, to set up that proportion, do cross products, the scale factor, or whatever. But this one, we're looking for 30%. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. But I might know what 10% of 20 is. Because when you think about it in terms of 10%, you're basically asking yourself, what goes into 20 10 times? 2. Okay? 10% of something is what goes into it 10 times. And 20 divided by 10 equals 2. So here's the thing. If 10% of 20 is 2, how many 10% do I need to get up to 30%? 3 of them, right? 10%, 10%, 10%, there's 30%. So if I multiply this by 3, that's going to give me 30%, which is what I want. I multiply 2 by 3, and what do I get?
6.
6! Didn't we get 6 as an answer when we did the fraction method?
Yeah.
So is 6 the correct answer here too?
Yeah.
You bet. Okay? So this is that more mental calculation to where if you can think, okay, I want 30%, but I'm going to start with just what's 10%. Because I can do that in my head. Right? What goes into 20, 10 times 2? And then you think, okay, I know what 10% is, but I want 30%. How many 10% do I need to get there? 3, that's how many 2's I need to get to my answer. And 2 times 3 is 6. So, with the test, we are looking for, what was it? 90% of 30? 90% of 30. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. So I'm going to break it down to what? 10%. Why 10%? Because it's easy to think about what goes into 30 10 times. Okay? 10% of 30 is what? 3. Mental, right? How many 10% do I need to get to 90%? None of them. So 10% times 9 gives me my 90%. That's what I want. And so I also multiply with 3 by 9. And what do I get?
27.
27. Is that the same answer that we got yesterday?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay? So the fraction method, it requires conversion, setting a proportion, doing cross products. This is much more mental. Okay? Much more mental. Questions on this here, what we did? Okay? The key here is to get down to that 10%. Right? Whatever your original percentage is, get down to that 10% and work up from there. Okay? Everyone have the notes? Can I scroll down? Okay, right. Taking a look at this third one here. Maybe you already did it with the fraction method. If you did, do it again with the percentages method that we just tried. Okay? Do it again with the percentages method that we just tried.
Both of them?
Just the third one, the 20% of 60. Okay, 20% of 60. If you want to try doing it mentally, go for it. That's even better. So again, that first step, I don't know what 20% of 60 is off the top of my head, but I do know what 10% of 60 is. Because if that's asking what goes into 60 10 times, what is it? 6, right? 10% of 60 equals 6. But I don't want just 10%, I want 20%. So if I double my 10% to get to 20%, I double the 6, and that gives me 12, 20%, or sorry, yeah, 20% of 60 equals 12. Okay? Questions on that? Do we like the percentages method better than fractions?
No.
We like fractions better. Cool. Okay? Where this can get a little bit trickier is with when you have like a 5%, you know, like 35% of 50 there. So we're going to do the tip method. Was it 15% of 40? Is that what it is? Okay. So we're looking for 15% of 40. Right? You left a 15% tip on a $40 restaurant meal. What is the amount of that tip? Again, we're going to break it down to 10%. Always 10%. Why? Because that it computes well in our heads, right? 10% of 40. What goes into 40 10 times? 4. Okay? We want 15%, right? If we double 10%, that gives us 20. That's too much, so we can't really use multiplication here. But what we can do is we can say, okay, 10% plus 5% is how much?
15.
15%. So in this case, we're adding 5%, which means we have to figure out what 5% of 40 is. And if 10% is 4, and 5% is half of 10%, what would 5% of 40 be? 9? Not 9, no. Madeline? 2. Right? If 10% is 4, and 5% is half of 10%,
Oh.
then this is going to be half of 4. 2. Okay? If 10% of something is 30, 5% would be 15. If 10% of something is 8, 5% would be 4, right? Since 5% is half of 10%, its value will be half of, in this case, 4. So we're going to add 4 and 2, just like we added 10% and 5% to get 15%. 4 plus 2 equals 6. 15% is 6. Okay, 15% of 40 is 6. Trying this with that 35% of 50 there, okay? Again, we're going to start with 10% because that is easily computable. What is 10% of 50?
5.
5, right? It goes into 50 10 times. 10% of 50 is 5. But we got to get up to 35%, okay? So this is kind of a multiple step here, but I think we can get there. How many 10% are in 35%?
3.
3, right? 3 10% is 30%. 4 is 40. That's too many. So we're going to start by getting to 30% by multiplying the 10% by 3. Right? 3 10% will get us to 30%. And then 5 times 3, that gives us 15. We're not quite done yet, though. We have to get to 35%. So here's where we kind of do what we did here. We're at 30%. We need to add another 5% to get to 35%. So we started with 10%, like we always do. We multiplied that by 3 to get to 30. We're not quite there yet. So we're adding 5% to bring us up to 35%. And if 10% of 50 is 5, right? 10% is 5. What will 5% be?
20.
Not 20. Think in halves here, right? 5% is half of 10%.
So it would be half.
So what is half of 5? 2.5. Is that what you're going to say? Perfect. Okay? 5% equals 2.5. Those get added, and so 35% equals 17.5. It gets a little bit tricky with those 5% going on there, okay? But especially when our percentage ends in a 0, getting that 10% first and then multiplying by however many 10% we have, a very mental, mathy way to get there. Okay? How are we doing? Dece. You seem a little bit sleepy today. It feels like it should be a Friday, right? Mass on a Monday just throws our routine off. You know, it feels like 2 days after Mass it should be a Friday, but lo and behold, it's only Wednesday. All right, the last method, the multiplication method. This is everyone's favorite because it's the easiest. That's why I save it for last. So again, looking at our example of the shots, we had 30. I forget what it is again. 30% of 20. 30% of 20. Does anyone know this multiplication method? Do you know where I'm headed with this here?
I do
Do you?
not.
You do not know. Okay. So this works best when you have both a number that ends in a 0, that 30%, and your whole also ends in a 0, that 20. What's the answer for this? We've solved it twice now. 6. Do you see how we can get 6 out of 30% of 20
No.
using multiplication?
No.
Come on.
My dad showed me because this is how we do it, and you have to multiply 20 times 30 and then divide by 100.
Even simpler than that. Even simpler than that. How do we get 6 out of the numbers we have up there? Hannah?
2 times 3.
Just 2 times 3. That's it. When your percentage ends in a 0 and your whole ends in a 0, all you need to do is multiply the first digits of each of them, and 3 times 2 gives us 6. Okay? Now, mathematically, what's going on here is because we're ignoring these zeros, that's kind of the dividing by 100 that Jimena was referring to there. Okay? But this works when both of your percentages end in a, or both your values end in a 0. You're really only looking at multiplying the 3 times 2, because 30 times 20 is 600. Divide by 100, that brings you 6 anyway. Okay, so we're kind of taking a math back shortcut here. This is the kind of thing that you'd see on your, Tic Tac feed. You're like, why didn't my teacher show me this easy method? Well, now I am, so don't get mad at me. Okay. The test: 90% of 30. What is the answer? We already solved it twice. 27. How do we get 27 from the numbers we have up there? 9 times 3 is 27. Okay? Again, works super well when both of your values end in a 0. Well, what if they don't? Right? The next one, with this tip. We were looking for 15% of 40. We know the answer should be 6. What can we do? Anyone see how we can get 6 by... That does give you 6, but no. That's not how, that's just quinking. Yeah? This one may be not quite as mental. Okay? But what you would do here is you'd stick a decimal point in between the 1 and the 5. And you would take 1.5 times 4. And that would give you 6. Which really is kind of what we did in the other ones too. Taking 3 times 2 is the same thing as taking 3.0. Stick a decimal point in between there. 3.0 times 2 equals 6. Here it'd be 9.0 times 3 equals 27 here. But we can kind of ignore the 0.0 because it doesn't really matter anyway. But here we have to include it because it's a 5. Okay? But that would be a mental way to get it. And it holds with the other things that we did too, right? The one that I had you do fractions on here. The answer was 24. 6 times 4, 24. Done. 7 times 9, 63. That's what you got. Done. 2 times 6, 12. What you got? Done. This one would be 3.5 times 5, which is 17.5. Done there as well. Isn't that nifty?
Yeah.
You should be cheering me, I feel like. Yes. Yes. Thanks, Schultz. Okay. So for your homework, which is going to be due tomorrow, find the following values, show your work. You need to use 2 methods from the front. Obviously, everyone's just going to use the multiplication method, right? Because it's super easy. You have to also show me either fractions or percentages. Okay, 2 methods. Not only does that prove to you that you've got it right, because if you get one answer using fractions and then a different answer using multiplication, that's not a good thing. Okay, all your answers should be the same. So 2 methods. You're practicing one of the more challenging ones. You can also use the multiplication method. You do need to show your work. Okay, you do need to show your work. Some word problems as well. Find 70% of 30. Then find 30% of 70. Explain why they're the same. You'll find that 70% of 30 and 30% of 70 are the same value. Why? Why does that make any sense? Then, this one. After a nice evening out with your family, you offer to pay the bill for dinner. the bill is $60 and you leave a tip of $9. Did you leave a 10%, 15%, or 20% tip? Okay, does that $9 represent 10% of 60, 15% of 60, or 20% of 60? Then estimate the following values. 21% of 30, 21% is kind of an awkward percentage, but what's it super duper close to? 20%. And if we think about this as 20% of 30, we can do that mentally. What's 20% of 30? 6. 2 times 3 gives us 6, right? 37% of 80. 37% is even more awkward than 21%. But what's 37% super close to? 40, right? So if we estimate, again, it's just estimating here, so we're getting close. 40% of 80, now you can do that mentally, okay? And then the last section, write a percentage statement that equals the given value. For example, if the given value is 15, you might write 30% of 50, because to get the 15, you can multiply 3 times 5 to get 15. So there's a lot of different things you're doing on this page. We've got 10 minutes to go over some together. Is there anyone, any section, any question you're confused by and you want to do together? Yeah, Leila. Up at the top, 20% of 110, okay? So doing the multiplication method, what are we going to be multiplying here? Remember on the front side, we kind of ignored the zeros, and that's what we multiplied, yeah? 20 times 11, a little bit.
Oh,
2 times 11, yeah. The reason why this works best when they end in zeros is we can kind of ignore those. That dividing by 100 step, we can just ignore those, and we're multiplying 2 times 11. So one method you could write down, 2 times 11 equals 22. For your second method, Layla, do you want to use fractions or percentages? Fractions. So this is one way to do it here, 2 times 11, we ignore the zeros, multiply. Second way, we're going to first convert 20% to a fraction, which is 20 over 100. Then set up a proportion, 20 over 100 equals how much over 110? There's no nifty scale factor that gives us straight to 100 to 110. So we can use simplification, cross products. 20 times 110 divided by 100, that's going to give us 22. Okay? You can use the same 2 methods for all of them if you want to, but make sure that you are showing your work. Other questions, other sections that need some assistance? If you're looking at the page and you're like, I don't know how to do this, then let's talk about it. Kelly.
The one about like the family going to dinner.
Okay, so for this one, the bill is $60, and you need to decide, you leave a $9 tip, you need to decide if that $9 represents 10%, 15%, or 20%. So let's just kind of play around this a little bit. What is 10% of 60? 6, right? 10%, those should be automatic, because it's asking you what goes into this number 10 times. In the case of 60, 6 goes into 60 10 times, right? So was the $9, was that a 10% tip? No, a 10% tip would have been $6, right? If the bill is 60, if you leave a 10% tip, 10% of 60 is 6, not 9, right? 20% is also easy. What's 20% of 60? 3? No. 12. 2 times 6. Also, if 10% is 6, if we double that to get 20%, 20%, it's gonna be 12. So does that $9 represent a 20% tip? No, a 20% tip would have been 12, which is not. So what's the only other option?
15%.
15% tip, which actually makes perfect sense because 15% is halfway between 10 and 20%, right? Isn't 9 halfway between 6 and 12? Yeah. Okay? So it fits, right? That scale of percentages that we talked about all the way back in CO19, that still holds here, you know? 10% is 6, we double that, we get 12, 15% is in the middle of 10 and 20%, 9 is in the middle of 6 and 12. It makes sense, okay? So 15% is the answer. Other sections. Surprised no one's asked about the bottom one yet. That very last one where I give you a number and you need to write a percentage statement. Okay? 430. What is a possible percentage statement that you could write? Give me two numbers that multiply to make 30.
15 and 2.
15 and 2. So how about 20% of 150? 2 times 15 equals 30. What other two numbers multiply to make 30? 3 and 10. So how about 10% of 300? Well, that didn't really. Ignore the zeros. 1 and 3, or 1 times 30. How about 6 and 5? 60% of 50. 6 times 5 makes 30. Right? Or flip that around. 50% of 60. 5 times 6. Okay? So when you're looking for this percentage statement, the number that I give you, you're essentially thinking about what multiplies to make that. Okay? And then those two numbers are going to be my first numbers of my first digits of my statement and end with a 0. Yes? Yes. Cameron, do you need to go to band now too?
Yeah.
Are you with Hannah?
Yeah.
In her group?
Yeah.
So when you got up to go to band and she didn't get up to go to band, that wasn't a hint?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, you should go to band now. So you two, this is homework for tomorrow then. Ava.
For the one that says like dividing 70% of 30 and then 30% of 70, do you have to do two equations?
No.
Or do we only have to do two equations at the top?
Correct. Only two methods for the very top section.
Yeah, so what do we do for like 70% of 30? Do we have to like do anything or just explain why?
Well, what is 70% of 30? Use the multiplication method.
Okay. Right now?
Yeah. Remember, the multiplication method is you're ignoring the zeros and you're just multiplying those first digits. 21, right? So 70% of 30 is 7 times 3, which is 21. What's 30% of 70? Why is it 21? Because 3 times 7 equals 21. So why are they the same?
Because they're the. Yeah, I'll let you answer.
Okay. And you can do that when you multiply, right? When you multiply something, order doesn't make a difference. 7 times 3 is the same as 3 times 7. So the reason why they're the same is because that multiplication method, you can flip the order, and it's going to be the same result. This is, do you know what this property is called? It starts with a C. You learned it back in 3rd grade. It starts with a C, ends in commutative. Commutative! Great job, people. It's because of the commutative property. that those two things are the same. You can reverse the order in which you multiply something. Same thing with addition. You can reverse the order and it will be the same result. So it is because of the commutative property that those two things are the same. Are we feeling okay about this?
Sure.
Okay? Again, on your test, you will not have a calculator on this section. So knowing the multiplication method is probably a really good one to know because you can get it with basic facts. As a backup, you know, the proportion method could work, okay? The fraction method, but, okay. Due tomorrow, Khan Academy is due tomorrow as well. That is our math.